Trey Hendrickson is still unhappy in Cincinnati, a guy we haven't talked a whole lot about lately since free agency, it seems like. But he issued a statement to ESPN basically saying how unhappy he still is and isn't getting the contract that he wants from the Bengals, and they're not even talking, it sounds like. So Trey Hendrickson has re-entered the conversation.
If I may, I'll read the entire statement because it is strongly worded. No communication has taken place between my camp and the organization post-draft, Hendrickson says. The offer prior to the draft did not reflect the vision we shared and were promised last offseason if I continued to play at a high level. Trey Hendrickson led the league in sacks for the second year in a row. Coaches are aware of these past conversations. Rather than using collaboration to get us to a point to bring me home to the team, they, in capital letters, are no longer communicating. I have been eagerly awaiting a resolution of this situation, but that's hard to do when there is no discussion and an evident lack of interest in reaching mutual goals.
So let's talk about, before we spin this to what it may mean for the Bears, if anything, we're talking about the guy who's led the league in sacks the last 2 years, very talented player who has ties to Dennis Allen back to New Orleans. Now, you could argue those ties were him being part of the regime that let him go. But the Bengals had three priorities to figure out their long-term futures this offseason. Okay, one was Jamar Chase, extended. One was T. Higgins, extended. The third guy, and it seemed impossible for them to extend all of them, is Trey Hendrickson. And this has gotten kind of ugly. The president of the team, I think that's her title, I forget, but she made some weird comments. Executive Vice President Katie Blackburn at the owners' meetings said, I think he should be happy at certain rates that maybe he doesn't think he'd be happy at. I think some of it is on him to be happy at this point.
So that's what excites you, right? The Bengals are not exactly a model organization, so maybe they would make a mistake and let Trey Hendrickson get out the door for not a whole lot of compensation. Now, the Bears would have to be willing and ready to pay him, and they do have the salary cap space to get that done if they want to. To me, this comes down to what can you get him for? And coincidentally, with our set today, we've got Gervon Dexter Sr. on there, and I would wonder if you were willing to put Dexter in a deal with them along with, say, a third or fourth round pick, would they be interested in that? Could you entice them and not have to give up even a second round pick to get him if you were to include a player? That'd be, you would be making a bet on Shamar Turner. You'd be making a bet on, you have invested both in the draft and in free agency on the interior of offensive line. So maybe you are still thin at edge, so there is a huge need there. The Bears' leader in sacks last year was Montez Sweat, who had a down year with 5.5. This dude had 17.5 sacks last year. This guy knows Dennis Allen. There are some things to be supremely excited about and some connections to the Bears if you want to stretch it a little bit.
Yeah, I don't see them getting rid of one of their young talents, but I think a precedent has been set when you look at some different players that have been traded, some defensive ends that have been traded, whether it be Chase Young, Hassan Reddick, or Matthew Judon, who the Bears tried to give up a second-round pick for last year right before the season started at training camp. We saw it kind of outlined in Hard Knocks. So I think Ryan Poles has shown a propensity of wanting to get aggressive on that defensive end market. He did once trade for Montez Sweat halfway through the season for a second-round pick. But those names that I mentioned, Chase Young, Hassan Reddick, Matthew Judon, all went for third-round picks, because I think the bigger thing when you talk about trading Gervon Dexter, where it doesn't make sense, is this guy, he's only got 1 year left on his deal. So whoever's trading for this player is now going to have to pay him an exorbitant amount of money. And so obviously the Bengals aren't willing to do that with the salary cap issues they now have, paying two wide receivers top billing.
He's 30 years old, so he's on the back end of his prime, normal age-wise. But he did get 17.5 sacks on a defensive line that wasn't exactly stacked last year. So does he have a couple more years left? Can you do a creative contract that pays him a boatload of money, front-loaded perhaps? The one thing I would assume the Bears' hesitation, at least my hesitation, would be, are the Bears one big-time edge rusher away from being a dynamic, can compete at the high end of the NFC have a chance to get through the playoffs. If you think you're that good, then it makes a whole lot of sense. But you are still going into year 2 of Caleb, and you just don't know exactly where you're at yet.
Well, look, I don't know what the compensation would be. I will say this. Trey Hendrickson's really, really good. I would be willing to trade pretty much anything that's not a first-round pick for him.
Right. If you're willing to give up a second-round pick for Matthew Judon last year, you should be willing to give up a second-round pick.
Well, that would have been a horrible trade. And thankfully the Bears did not do
that. Right, but they tried to do it is the point. So there's
yeah, but we got to be fair. They tried to do it to a point. They didn't offer enough to get him.
Right.
I thought they weren't willing to do a second-round pick. Yeah, I thought it was like they were stuck on a third.
Because didn't he go for a third?
Yeah, maybe they were only willing to give a fourth. It doesn't matter. The bottom line is they know they have a need there, and what's the price? And if the price,
I don't know what the price is, but let's follow some more breadcrumbs here. I mean, one is the ideal time for the Bengals to probably trade this guy was about a month and a half ago, if not 2 months ago. I think there was a period in there in which he was granted permission to seek a trade. Did not happen. Now they went out and they drafted Shamar Stewart.
Yep.
The Bengals did. So that's another little wrinkle in all this, in that they seemingly drafted a replacement, but a replacement who's not ready right now. He's all trades. So,
and he didn't show up to rookie minicamp because he doesn't have his contract figured out.
Is that true?
Yeah.
That's a really weird thing to do by him, because you're given a waiver and you're allowed to. Everybody shows up to rookie minicamp.
Yep. Well,
Caleb didn't have his contract done until training camp last year. He went through all of OTAs and veteran minicamp. That's a weird thing. I was unaware of that.
There's another interesting wrinkle here, too, is Trey Hendrickson has played for Dennis Allen before. His breakout season, which came in a walk year for the Saints, Trey Hendrickson had 13.5 sacks. Also, if you combine the contracts of Montez Sweat, DJ Moore, and Jalen Johnson, those 3 contracts this year have a cap hit of $70 million. There could easily be a restructure or two there to clear up some space for Hendrickson's contract coming in.
Well, plus Hendrickson's due $1 million. I think it's $21 million in cap, or 1 year, $21 million. You restructure that, you sign into an extension, you can actually make this first year almost nothing with signing bonus and stuff. So there's a way to finagle all of that. But on the other side of it, as I bring up what has changed over the last 2 months, we can't ignore the fact that the Bears already spent a pretty decent amount of money on Dio Adegbo. It's a pretty big bet.
They didn't, right, which is why you would think that the Bears are not going to be in on the conversation here, because they did not wait this out at all.
On the other hand, they could have used a first-round pick on a defensive end. They did not do that. They did not draft one. So is the roster room there? Yes. Is the cap room there? Now, cap room can be viewed a couple different ways. Do they have the space? Can they create it? Absolutely. The amount you're allocating to one position, though, start talking about Dio's contract on top of Montez Sweat's contract, now on top of Trey Hendrickson's contract. One of those guys would be above 30. Sweat's.
You're still trying to extend Joe Thuney.
Yeah, it starts to get kind of dicey.
But when you ask, are they one player away? If it wasn't for the fact that we have no idea what a Ben Johnson offense is going to look like here in Chicago, as far as a roster standpoint, I mean, you could make the argument they are one Trey Hendrickson away from really pushing this over the top, especially defensively.
Now I'm having deja vu, because this is the same thing. The Khalil Mack trade was not a bad trade. They had the quarterback wrong. Well, if you made this trade again, now this would not be the same price. Trey Hendrickson, he might lead the league in sacks.
Yeah, because you're not giving up future first-round picks.
Pure talent. I don't think this is not a Khalil Mack level trade. It'd still be a significant trade, but it would not be Khalil Mack. The money that you'd have to pay the guy on top of it might be, pretty big. But regardless, how that trade is viewed, to me, would ultimately come down to, did you draft the right quarterback? Is the quarterback good? Because to me, that was always the problem with the Khalil Mack move. They had a pretty good year that year. They might even won a championship had they had the quarterback. But they didn't.
Listen, if Caleb's great and Ben Johnson does what Ben Johnson's supposed to do with this offense, Trey Hendrickson could be the piece that puts the Bears over the top. I don't think it does. The Bears aren't really super set up to do this. as we wrap up this conversation, but they could do it. And when premium talent becomes available, you would think if you're a premium organization, you're in those conversations.
Can I have one more angle to this? Montez Sweat is due $25 million in 2026. He could be caught for a dead cap hit of $8 million. If we see what we saw out of him this past season, I'm not paying him $25 million in 2026. Trey Hendrickson could be a bit of an insurance policy for Montez Sweat, and then you don't have to worry about the Dio Dangbo because those two will just play opposite each other.
It's an angle. You're on the clock, Montez. That's why he's working out like a madman. So hopefully that won't materialize as far as wanting to cut him. But
all right, on the spot, everything we've talked about here. Greg, would you trade for Trey Hendrickson?
I'd be all for it. All for it.
Carm.
I'm interested. I'm listening.
You're flirting.
I'm flirting. Depends on the price, but yes.
That's not an answer.
I'm in, and I put this on record. It's a big momentous occasion on this show. I like where Carm's head was going with trying to include a player headed back towards Cincinnati. Steven, you in or not?
In a heartbeat.
Yeah. All right. Trey Hendrickson is now a Chicago Bear. Talk to you next time on CSGO Bears Podcast.